Welcome to Sex, Lies, and Blank Pages with our very special guest, Karina, Halle.
Yay! Welcome.
I'm so happy to have you.
Jinx.
Jinx, go ahead.
Yes. How are you doing? It's lovely to see you.
I'm doing great. How are you guys doing? It's been I can't believe it's already like November. Like I don't get it.
Right?
Unbelievable.
Well, it's like getting close to like December, and I'm like, wait, didn't October just start?
Yeah, wasn't it just September? Yeah.
Yeah.
But
you're suffering over in Hawaii while all of us are like bundled up now. We're like, sure, it's so warm.
But you've been in Europe for like a month and a half, so you don't get to talk.
No, it's been great.
Yeah.
So we're familiar with you, but our audience might not be. So hit us with the best and all that. You've been in the industry for how many years now?
My first book was published in 2011. So
You're not same
long
year.
enough.
Yeah.
But yeah, so I started off doing self-publishing. I remember, you know what, I'm gonna ramble, so I apologize ahead of time. But I don't have like the elevator pitch of like my career yet. So like everything's just like a big rambly mess. But I'll do it so that like in 2009, I wrote my first book, and then 2010, I wrote my second, and then I thought maybe I'll, go the route and get an agent, and ended up not, because self-publishing just started becoming like a thing to my knowledge, right? I know it existed before then, but like Amanda Hawking, she was one of the first authors that I saw like making a killing at it, and I was like, I can do that too. So like in my Delulu head, I was just like, I'm gonna be like the superstar. Of course I wasn't, but 2011 May 13th was my first book came out, and by the time I released that, I already had written 3 in that series, so I kind of did a fast release for the first 4 books. And and ever since then, like the following year, I finally was able to, quit my job and write full time. And then I got an agent.
Wait, you just said all of that like it was just hunky dory. I did this. So many people who are listening right now they're gonna have their minds blown. So take us back to that moment where you've successfully published, you've been able to quit your job, you have an agent. Like that had to have been like you had to have felt like you were on the highest of highs.
Yeah, I guess it was. Okay, so don't mind me putting my sunglasses on because it's so like bright.
And she's bragging to us. It's like dark over here.
Okay, so the first series I wrote was not like I had no idea about like writing something that will like sell or anything like that, right? So it was basically like a ghost hunting duo that falls in love. So it has the same kind of, it was romance, but it was like a long romance brought out over the series, but it was also mixed with horror, which was my other love. So this series was kind of like, I made the characters like very different. Like my heroine was plus sized and suffered from like depression and anxiety. And my hero was like snarky, sarcastic, has a mustache, and like isn't like super tall, he's like 5'9" or something, right? So like wasn't your standard stereotypical hero and heroine kind of thing at the time anyway. And but I wrote them anyways because I was just totally in love with their personalities, and I was always inspired by like the X-Files, because that Mulder and Scully like will they won't they tension is like just delicious to me. So like that is actually
I'm pretty sure, not that this is like, that's one of the top 10 or top 5 of like fan fiction in like and community driven.
Yes.
Is X-Files, Harry Potter. Like there's so many, but X-Files has like stood the test of time.
Absolutely. Because I remember like being like, I don't know, how old was I? Like mid-teens, I don't know, 14. And it was just when the chat room started on like the internet, right? So it was still like, this was Windows 95 era. And I remember in the Windows 95 era that I had discovered fan fiction of the X-Files. So it existed even back then online. And I remember being like, what? You can just like create your own like alternate like world or ending or whatever for the series. So like my 14-year-old self was just like blown away by it. I didn't know I could write that, so I didn't at the time, but like definitely I was pulled into that will they won't they thing. So I guess you could say in a way my series kind of was like X-Files fan fiction. But so I started off doing that, and it was tough back then. I had to, let's see, for when it came to like a cover, like I had I didn't know what to do. So I had this artist draw this cover, and actually ended up look pretty cool, but not at all like, and I had a friend who's a graphic designer. He helped put it together. And so like, it was very hodgepodge, like, you know, the editors, they were really hard to come by. So like that, I went through many different editors before I found the right one. And the self-published community back then was really growing. So there wasn't the level of support that there is now, because it was just such a new thing. But I just remember
you and I came around, it sounds like the same time, and it was
Yeah.
a lot more investigating, trying to, like, I would look at, like, I would have probably looked at your book and been like, oh, I like that cover. Who did it? And I would track them down. And
Yes.
yeah, it was a lot more. It wasn't available on, like, to you. Like, you
No.
couldn't just go and be
You
like, oh,
had
I'm going to
to
get
really
like an
look
artist
for
or,
it.
yeah.
Yeah. And I, at the time, like, the idea of like contemporary romance didn't even enter my head. Like, I didn't know that was a thing. Like, I was just so focused on paranormal and like horror kind of stuff that I didn't really think about it. So I was already kind of removed from that audience as well, like the romance audience, because I just, at the time, I was not paying attention to what was coming out, not until later. So, but, you know, I started off on Goodreads, you know, building a community there, and like, and readers, and getting readers that way, which was nice.
I'm
and
sorry,
that
you just
would-
said Goodreads and nice in the same
Well, and I was
sentence.
I know.
That was back in the day.
In 2011, it was
When it first-
nicer, but
Yeah.
it was still not great, because there were like, I personally, because my previous job, I was a music journalist, and I guess ruffled some feathers or whatever. I just had some people that didn't like me that went out of their way to like sabotage the book release of my first book. Stuff still happens like to this day, you know, just for various reasons, right? So that existed on my first book. The first review I ever got on my book was a 1-star from this dude who like was in love with me, but I wouldn't give him the time of day. So, like, there's always controls on Goodreads, and I actually did back then get a few of those accounts he created reported, and they took it down. So like Goodreads at the start, before it was owned by Amazon, was kind of like a little bit of a nicer place to be. They were a little bit more on the author's side. But I quickly realized over the years, you know, obviously Goodreads is not a place for me as an author. It's definitely fine for readers. But but during those first few years, yeah, there was a lot of Goodreads being on there, because that's the only way I knew how to reach people.
Right.
And so honestly, I didn't feel anyone was going to read my book. Even though I had already like 4 books out and I had a small following, I didn't have enough money to survive. And you know what's funny is today I saw a graphic, because I was looking through my old Facebook photos trying to find a photo, and I found a graphic that I saved in January 2012. And it was like the first time I was like, oh my God, maybe this could be lucrative. So I had sold my first book in 2012. In January, had sold 3,000 something odd books. And then the second month sold 7,000. But I want to say that I think those weren't paid. I think that was a free promo. Because BookBub, which is really interesting, BookBub actually really helped me out. Had no idea who they were. They just started up, and they contacted me and they said, hey, we're BookBub, we're a new company, and we decided to promote your book, your free book, for free. And so I got all these sales coming in because they did that. I mean, can you imagine nowadays?
Yeah, that's
like,
amazing.
like, I don't know who you are.
It's not free.
They haven't like let me have a BookBub in I think like 7 years. They're like, no.
Exactly.
No.
So I'm just like, but don't you remember me? Remember you helped me out, and I was like, oh, look at BookBub, look all this great stuff they're doing. But anyways, that was amazing. So after that, I kind of picked up my series a bit, but not in any way that I could like support myself on it. And it wasn't until my 4th, so I had 4.5 books, 4 books and a novella, that I was finally like, oh, okay, now my income is starting to be greater than my day job that I had. So that's when I quit. So I quit my job, and like, it was just like a whatever. I was just administrator for like a mining firm or something. Like, I have a journalism background, and being a journalist is like extremely hard, bad paying work, you know? So like, I was always taking office jobs just to kind of get by, but I was able to quit my office job in like July of 2012. But honestly, what's funny, you see all this advice these days from people saying like, you need 5 books basically before you can kind of consider becoming an author full time, or 5 books before you start seeing real income and success and yada yada. I find that true, because literally for me, it was 5 books before I started actually feeling like confident in myself. Like, oh, okay, I do have the support. But honestly, it was also a lot of luck.
Well, for me, it was 6. And I would also say I had a lot of luck. I was kicking ass and I was publishing like 1 book a month. But it was at 6 books when I asked my husband to quit his job and help me.
Yeah.
Stacey, how many books was it for you?
It was my second one, but it was
Yeah.
I'm jumping all in. Like I have Well, it was I was given an ultimatum at my job. I was working retail and I was miserable. I hated it. And they basically go, if you go to the signing event, don't bother coming back. And I'm like,
Right. And
So,
you're like,
yeah.
see ya.
Yeah.
And then from there, I just never went back. It was just, but I think logically, if I thought about it, I probably would have waited longer. But at that time, it was like one of those, like,
Yeah.
all right, let's
What
jump or
about
swim now.
Can
And
you
it worked.
remember financially when you did start to feel like, okay, this is going to be good?
For me?
Or I was thinking just Stacey, since
Okay, yeah.
Well,
you put more, I think, for
at
her,
that
yeah.
time, I was already making more than what I was being paid at that retail job. But
Yeah.
like it's not hard in America to be, like
Yeah.
it was so minimal, and especially in San Francisco.
Oh my God.
Like I mean, it was like barely, I was working so much and I hated it, but and no matter how much I like work there, I would never have had enough for my apartment. So thank God I have rent control. But it was like, so I was already making more writing, no matter, at that time. So, but again, this was such a different time. This is like, I could never do that now. Like now it would be totally different, but at that time was okay to do that.
Yeah. It's kind of like, just like, you can't just go and like, cause I know many people who've written a book and then been like super disappointed that it didn't take off. And I'm just like, look, like, it is very rare. It happens, but like, it's very rare that your book takes off. Even back then, like now it's kind of like, oh, you just got lucky with a TikTok and it can just, obviously your book can go to the moon and back.
It could, but then your next good book could be nothing. That's what the problem with this job is. Like one day, like your book could be great, and the next your book you do another release, and it's like, oh,
the valleys of the valleys and the peaks of this job are crazy. Like that is one thing about that I've noticed, just like in general, and then just like with the changes of the industry too. But just like no one can stay consistently the same the whole time. Like it's just not possible. Like even like, like as like, I'm friends with Colleen Hoover. And so, but I could say like Colleen would even say to you that like, even for her, like I saw her success take off in 2012 with Slammed, or 2011. Mm-hmm. And I remember it's so funny because I remember being on the Kindle boards, the Kindle community in KDP, or just an offshoot of KDP. Anyways, I remember being there and people being like, who is this Colleen Hoover? Why is her book number like 1 in the store? If that was for Slam, and being like, it's all paid for, it's all rigged, it's all like all the reviews are fake. Like people are like throwing accusations all the way back then. And so that was enough for me to be like, who was this Colleen Hoover? So then I went and read Slammed, and I actually really enjoyed it. Mm-hmm. And enough that I reached out to her and I emailed her, and I was just like, hey, I just wanted to let you know. And already back then, she was being like, this was like 2 months of the book releasing, and she was already having like people showing up at her work, like being obsessive. And I'm just like, oh, you're in it for the long run. But like even someone like Colleen, even though back then we were like, saw her meteoric, rise, for her, it's different when you start at the top, and then after for her peaks and valleys are still kind of the same. It's just on a different kind of level. So I just find it interesting that like no matter what, we're always going up and down. And 100%. I think,
and she has posted publicly about that too. A few years ago, prior to TikTok really being beneficial, I know she made a post about, every launch, she doesn't know if it's even going to be as many sales as the last.
Exactly.
There are peaks and valleys in everything. So,
And also, I mean, she had like a publisher for most of that. And then that's tough too, because you're like, you might be making yourself feel better being like, oh yeah, I didn't sell as many as last time, but that's okay. Next time I'll do better, if you're positive minded. But your publisher might be like, you're going downhill, you know what I mean? And so like that adds like an extra layer of like the peaks and valleys, like just never knowing. So I don't know where I was going with this, but
well, when was your switch over to contemporary finally? Like, when did you go? Like, because how I found you, I love that horror. That was my first read, was all your, and the horror, paranormal, the ghost stories. I love those. Yeah.
So the contemporary. Okay, so So after I got my agent, he signed me on, and he approached me. So at this point, I didn't even know I needed an agent, but he approached me, and I was like, this is amazing. I don't have to go and look for one. I don't have to query or anything like that. And he was just basically gonna like he tried to sell my first horror series to Forever. And I had a wonderful editor there, Latoya, and she was amazing. But I'm not surprised that she couldn't convince the board to be like, get on board with it. So that kind of got pushed to the side, and I continued writing those books. And then I switched to contemporary. So I went to romantic suspense because I saw Samantha Young had just done On Dublin Street. And I was like, first of all, I loved the book. And then I was just also blown away by her success, because she also started with paranormal and kind of, that kind of thing, and fantasy, and then wrote this contemporary and blew up. So I was like, oh, maybe I need to do that. But then I was looking at, why do people resonate with this book so much? And she was saying many times in like her blog or interview or whatever, that like she put a lot of herself into it, like a lot of stuff that she didn't really, was kind of scared to be vulnerable about and like talk about with, publicly. She put that into the book, and that made it a lot more relatable for people, I think. So, Jocelyn going through her grief and everything like that. And some other issues and seeing a therapist and things like that. So I remember thinking like, okay, well, what ails me, and what is something that like I could talk about in a way that's not too vulnerable? Because I was like still a little bit like unsure, like when I first contemporary, right? So I just didn't want to go all the way in, but I was like, okay, let's give myself a character. So my character in my romantic suspense, she was someone that has scars on her legs like I do, but mine's from birth and surgeries, and hers was just from a horrific accident. But I kind of gave her the things that I had to deal with in high school. So there's some high school flashbacks in that book. This is Sins and Needles. And that she had to deal with that. And that was like what I went through directly. So it was a lot of putting myself out there. And I felt like I could kind of do that better with a contemporary. Now, of course, the irony is that this is a romantic suspense and she's a con artist. And obviously I'm not a con artist, but and I wanted it exciting. So that's kind of how I went into contemporary, because I was like, going from horror to like straight into contemporary would have been too much of a jump, because I wanted something still exciting. You know what I mean? Like I didn't feel the urge to go into a rom-com from horror. So like I kind of wanted to go into something that was a little bit more, non-supernatural based, but still exciting and dark. And so that's when I did Sins and Needles and that trilogy. And then after that, I started to go into contemporary. So it's kind of like a stepping stone in a way.
You like handheld your loves. Like you literally handheld your loves as they moved you across. Yeah,
exactly.
So this is a good time to bring up my first. I met you. I think there was an author event in Seattle at the like Hard Rock Cafe, and I remember like there was a bunch of you there with Colleen and stuff like that. And you were saying like, I wish, like somebody said, like, what's the vice that you wish you like listen to, or wish you could go back and change? And you said, I wish I changed my name for contemporary. And at that moment, I just almost was about to release my first contemporary. And I'm like, no. Like, I'm going to like, I already have an audience. Like, I'm sure that's for her. But now I'm sitting here just today announced I'm splitting my name.
I saw that. And I was like, that makes sense.
Every time I'm like, why didn't I listen to Karina? Like, was I so stubborn and so pig-headed thinking like, oh, I'll have the audience. And I just want to go back and go at that moment, like, do you still feel that way about changing your name and the audience like that you feel at that time when you were jumping between those?
I do. I wouldn't go back and change it now, just because I have contemporary books published by publishers, so I couldn't change my name on those. So it's going to stay Karina Halle, and that's just the way it is. But still, if I could go back in time, I would have done something different. I would have chosen a pen name that's very similar to my name. It wouldn't have been a secret pen name. It would have been like S. Marie, right? Like I would do something like Karina H, or I don't know, something like that, or
Kay Halle,
Kay Halle, that's cute.
Yeah, Kay Halle would have been great, and that's what I would have done in hindsight. Because believe me, it's been a pain in the ass to kind of negotiate these two different things. I think people are used to it now with me, because I've done the horror, paranormal to contemporary romance, and then back kind of into paranormal fantasy. So I've kind of done this back and forth thing so that people are not as confused. But Yeah, I if I had, you know, a time machine, I probably would have. I think it would have just saved me some stress, maybe.
I think
Yeah,
your
it's just funny.
covers-
You've been in my head forever now because I'm
Yeah.
like, why did I listen to
Yeah,
her?
yeah. Yeah. I think
I
it would have
think you do-
helped.
You do a great job with your covers also, where your covers really
Mm.
embrace what the
Yeah.
genre
Yes.
is.
Yeah.
So
Mhm.
I think, and now that your brand is very much, I write like whatever I want to write,
Yeah.
I think that like readers can tell with your covers,
Yeah.
like
Yeah.
what they're getting into.
I would hope so. I mean, I even noticed that like because I always use Hong for like 99% of my covers, and Hong, you know, with my non-contemporary covers, the font of my name is different than on the contemporary. So even like the smallest change like that, I noticed that I'm like, oh yeah, like the contemporaries is kind of like blocky looking, and then in the other one it's more like sharp, you know. So like there's like little changes like that. But I do think it's helpful, like for you, Stacey, because I know for you, like it makes sense because it's still me. I'm an author, and like I've got my audience. My audience, surely they read contemporary as well as that, and most do. But it's amazing how expectations change. I don't know. I feel like if you had a pen name, then they really are in their heads like, okay, I know what I'm getting into when I pick up this book with this name. Versus like if you don't make that distinction, I still think sometimes subconsciously the reader can kind of be expecting one thing and get another, even though they knew that going in. So I do think
I think there's going to be core people that read your stuff no matter what you write. But I think majority of the people finding me, they're going to Google like, oh, I'm feeling contemporary. They're going to Google it and be like, oh, this looks like paranormal. Okay, I'm no longer interested. She must write paranormal. So that's why I want to divide it now. It's like, here's no contemporary. It's still say me. Most of you will know that. But I think, there needs to be more of a clear. So I was just like, so you're always been in my head for so long. And I'm like, no. And now I'm like, damn it.
yeah. Well, it's better, you know, it's better late than never. But but yeah, you're right. And even for me, because my backlist is so big, it would be helpful if I could split it up. You know, so because people are like, what book should I read? I'm like, I don't know. Like, what do you like? Like, I have no idea. Like, I could give you this like thing and this complete opposite thing, and I don't know which one you're going to feel like. So I do think that pen name would be smart, but I can't change it. So.
For our audience, though, if you had one book or two books, one contemporary and one more on that horror side, what are the two recommendations that you would give?
Sophie's choice.
I'm
kidding, your kids. You only get 2 kids to give out.
Oh man. Okay. I don't know. Okay, so if I had to pick one contemporary that would just like appeal to the masses, I would say maybe The Royals Next Door, the one that I have with Berkeley, that came out a couple years ago, because that one, it's a rom-com, but it's very inoffensive, and it's very like when my mom tries to sell the book to people, when she's always like, I gave the neighbor a book, and I'm just like, what book? And then it's like The Royals Next Door. I'm like, oh, okay. You know what I mean? So it's like the one book that I'm like, most people will probably like this and not have a problem with it. And it's still a bit spicy, but it's obviously not as spicy as my usual books, but it still has graphic sex scenes in it. But it's also like a little bit more on the sweet side, and it's a little bit more like palatable, and it has some serious topics, but it's still like light. It's still like a rom-com, but it's not like dark or anything.
It's a starter book. It's something to get them hooked on you.
Yeah.
I think that's a safe bet. It's not terribly angsty. There's no third act breakup or anything like that in it. So like, I mean, I have many books that do have that, but like, so yeah, I would say maybe that one. And then for the fantasy, I would say maybe, well, again, what kind of fantasy do you like? I don't know.
Yeah, it's too hard.
I say go dark. Go the other end. Go the
go really your darkest one.
And then I would probably do Blood Orange, because I really love that book. And
that was great.
Really, it's dark, but it's not like you crazy dark romance dark, but it is pretty dark, and it's very sexy, and I'm very proud of it, and I really like that book, and I like the characters. So I'd say Blood Orange, you know, because it's modern day, but it's also a fantasy because it's like got vampires, right? But yeah, I'd say Blood Orange, just because I think that most people would probably like that as well. It's hard to say.
Yeah, no, it's like, here,
Excellent.
pick all of your children. It's just
Yeah.
crazy as artists. Like, I don't want to be, I want to write it all. I want to write what the muse tells me, and to like have to sometimes
Mhm.
stay in these like lanes.
Yes.
You know, like, as a reader knows you, like, I write paranormal, so they know me as paranormal. I'm like, but
Yeah.
I want to write mystery today.
Yeah,
I don't
exactly.
stay in the lane, but it definitely, the income is not the same. Like
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
write my
Mhm.
small town romances. I write them because I need them. It like fills my cup back up. Does
Yeah.
not sell nearly as well as
Yeah.
dark romance. Paranormal is like in the middle.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's definitely, I think what you're known for is just what you are known for.
Mhm.
Yeah.
But I say write it all anyway.
Oh, write it all. Just
Yeah,
Mhm.
write it all. And you never know what's going to take off too, right? So
So true.
that's, yeah, you don't know. Sometimes the ones you're like, well, this is going to be a big hit. This is hitting all the notes and blah, blah, blah. And then you're like, it's crickets. And then you write something like, I don't know, one's going to like it. And then everyone does. And you're like, okay, well, I don't know anymore.
yeah, I know. That's how I felt recently. Yeah.
Yeah.
You've been very honest about you being on spectrum and writing.
Yeah.
So how does that affect you? Like, how does, like, just, I mean, because writing is hard enough. I mean,
I
just
know.
getting our butts down and writing
know.
some days. So how do you deal with all that kind of stuff?
See, my problem is that because I have ADHD, and I only figured out the ADHD thing in like 2018. So I actually wrote a character who had ADHD, and it was while was like going through like all the notes for him and researching it more, that I was like, oh no. But I was like, I can't have ADHD because I'm not hyperactive. Like, I'm not running around screaming my head off, like can't sit still kind of thing. I'm like, I'm not that person. But I didn't understand until like, well, in women, it's most likely to present inside your head. And I was like,
Oh, great.
oh.
Uh-oh.
I was like, oh no.
I think you just signed me up too.
Yeah. So after that, I was like, oh shit, now I have ADHD. But it explained so much. And it definitely explained how I write too. So people are like always like, how do you write so fast? And it's like, well, I very rarely, sometimes this happens, but I very rarely get an idea and then immediately start writing it and then immediately publish it. That doesn't usually happen for me. When I'm like, oh, I write a book in 2 weeks, it means I had 2 months to write it and it didn't get written until the last 2 weeks because I procrastinate. Everything is left until the last minute because I need that adrenaline to kind of keep it going. And also, like, when I have tried to write like normally and like, I'm going to take 3 months to write this book, I'm going to write every single day, it just does not happen because I have to be like obsessed with what I'm writing. I have to be really passionate about it. Otherwise it's torture. And I have written books that I had to write and was torture. And I was like, this sucks. I hated every single minute of it. It just wasn't fun. And I was like, what am I doing with my life? Why am I doing this? And because I didn't feel the passion. So like, in order to feel that, I really have to be immersed and obsessed. And I can't keep that up for a long period of time. Like, I can't, like I like to kind of be in it for like 2 weeks or 3 weeks or a month or whatever it is, and then be gone. So for that time I'm writing, I'm super obsessed with it, and when it's done, then it's done, and I can just move on to the next thing. So I can't really do the slow like Stephen King method of just like spending a whole year working on a book, writing 1,000 words a day. Like, I can't do that because I can get so bored really quickly.
Well, you're in good company. There are a lot of amazing artists who need that fire under their butt. I remember Stan Lee did a article or something. It was incredible. And he was talking about his procrastination. And he would wait sometimes like the day before to write it all. And I was like, oh, thank goodness, professionals actually do this. Like,
well, that's why I hate when people give advice. They're like, give a new writer's advice, and they're like, get your butt in a chair every day. I'm like, no, that maybe not work for you. That's awful advice. Yeah. And I'm like, that doesn't work for me either. Like, I cannot force myself to write. That it's like the worst torture
it's bad.
ever.
And then it's like, it's hard on you. And then every time I do that and I go back to read what I wrote, I'm like, this is like garbage. Like, I worked super hard to write garbage.
You feel even worse too. You're like, I feel even worse.
Exactly. And like, and I should have known, because like in university, like I would write the paper or whatever it was the day after it was due. So I was like an extra level of it, and I would take the cut. I'd be like, I'll take it and get a B instead of an A. Like, I don't care. This is how I work. And so when it comes to writing, it's very similar. And also, like, another problem is being unable to stick to one thing, because it's like, what I feel like, it's like being a mood writer. I don't feel like writing this anymore. I want to write this, or I want to write that. And so for me, it's always tough with series, because the chances of me losing interest in the series are quite high. So I have to really spend a lot of time coaxing myself back into that world. And usually it works. And I'm usually, once I'm back into it, I'm like, oh, this is great. But it does take a while, because your brain is just like distracted by so many different things. It's also why we as authors, usually as we're writing, something, we get stuck by like shiny other idea when we're like, what are we, you know what I mean? Like you're trying to finish one book and you're almost like down, or you're halfway through, and then suddenly there's just some other idea. You're like, oh, I'd rather write that. And
Stacy's great for that.
I'm like 6 series ahead of the one I should be writing now. I'm like, where is that one?
Yeah. And then you're just like, one day I'll feel like it. And so like, and sometimes you do in this, and sometimes you don't. But yeah, I definitely think that in some ways ADHD, I don't want to say it's a superpower, but when I get things done fast like that, it's great. But in other times it's just really hard to buckle down and concentrate, because you're just distracted by everything. And also, like, I do have to say, like, part of having ADHD is the rejection dysmorphia, sensitivity dysmorphia. And oh my God, that is so awful in general. But when you're a writer, it's just like, and of course, like, don't look at reviews. You try not to, but like, you can even see the slightest thing someone says wrong, and then you're just like, oh, I'm just gonna throw myself off a bridge. And like, you feel it so hard. So that's another thing that's really hard as an author, because people are like, oh, just brush it off, have like a tough skin, you need a tough skin to be in this business. It's like, yeah, I know, and obviously it's tough enough if I'm still here, but it doesn't mean that I don't like freak out every time someone says something that's like not 100%, because I will always focus on the negative, because that's just kind of how my brain is trained. So like, I could have like 99 amazing reviews, and then like one review's like, this is the worst book I ever read, and I'd be like, oh, it's the worst book in the world. You know what I mean? Like,
I feel this.
It sucks. So like, that is a part of the ADHD that's kind of like, okay, I realize that's my thing. I kind of have to just like deal with it, and there's no way to get over it. You're stuck.
I appreciate you talking about it though, and being so open, because mental health is one thing that our culture needs to catch up on.
I know.
Right.
Yeah, educate ourselves and have more grace. And
There's not a lot of open conversations about it, really.
And
no,
probably a lot of people suffering from it that don't realize it. Like everything you're saying, I'm like, oh God.
Yeah.
I'm really nervous right now.
Yeah. And it's true, because it's if I had people talking about ADHD in women back, like years ago, I would have probably been able to look into it and get diagnosis then, versus than finding it on my own. Like, It took me like having to research ADHD to find out like, oh, I have it. When like nowadays, I do feel like you're more likely. Like, I've seen people get diagnosed in real time now. And especially now that I know I have it, I'm very easy. I can spot it in other people and friends of mine. And I'm just like, you need to get that checked out.
And it's like you said, it's so different in women, because what you hear more is the diagnosis for men, and not women.
It's, of course, it's always men. They're the ones who've been studied for everything, and they're the ones who all the medications tested on and everything like that. And
birth would be so much easier. There would be so much more help in giving birth if women were involved in the medical profession, like centuries ago. Like, really? Did you know that
everything is skewed?
What the chainsaw was actually manufactured for the help of giving birth?
Yeah. Oh yeah.
That to cut women open, a chainsaw. Yes, that was the medical attention. So I'm like, I think about that all the time though, because I'm just like, when you
I will too. Yeah.
I was like, in a horror book.
No, but it's true. So like, if I do think like the reason I speak about it also is because I have ADHD, and I can't, not shut up about certain things that I'm passionate about. Like, but also I'm glad that I do, because then other people in time will kind of maybe see themselves in me, or see themselves in others, because then the more you speak up, someone else speaks up, yada yada. And then it becomes less, I'm pretty like, because I do notice like everyone now is talking about it, and no one, I don't notice anyone really having shame anymore around. Doesn't mean they don't feel it, but it's they don't feel shamed enough to like not talk about it. So I like that that's how the conversation in the last 5 years has kind of gone in that direction, that it's like, it's not stigmatized as much anymore, but there's still a lot of it.
in the spaces that you're in, you're not seeing that stigma. And that might be an escape for them where they can feel safe and where they can be curious and where they can educate themselves. Where that in real life or in other places. Yeah.
And also being open, having you help when, because I've noticed like deadlines you've missed a couple times or something like that, and being more open about it. You're like, we're human over here. Yeah, a couple times. But it's just like we're human, because I think a lot of times they expect like we're machines over here.
We're like, machines, but we're not. I mean, I struggle with deadlines because like I need the people like, why do you set deadlines? And I'm like, I tried to not, and then it just doesn't get done. So I have also tried to, I mean, ideally for me, the best way would to set deadlines, don't publicly announce them. However, the problem with that is in a perfect world, I could just be like, okay, I'm going to write this book, not tell anybody about it, and then write it and be done, and then I'll announce it. But it doesn't work that way, because you also have to have a cover. You have to hire an editor, and these people are beholden to deadlines too. So you can't, I don't know. And you kind of have to get the hype machine kind of going, which I admittedly suck at hyping up my own stuff, because I get so burnt out on like marketing that when I get burnt out, that's the first thing to go. Like I'll preserve my writing the most, but like I'll just stop marketing altogether. Like I literally have just now, because I'm just like, I don't care. I'm burnt out on the marketing. I don't want to push anything anymore. I just need to focus on writing and then figure it out. But like for me, like I've tried the secret deadline thing and it hasn't really worked. And it's also tough because as authors, we do want to have pre-orders up because they are helpful, like when I don't have a pre-order, all I deal with is where's the pre-order comments. And so I don't know if like that skews it to like you thinking that everybody wants to pre-order a book, but it is helpful to have that book out there on Amazon or wherever with a date, so it's coming, and then people can save that to remember or whatever. Even if they don't pre-order it, it kind of acts as a marker or something. Versus if you don't have the pre-order, then people are more likely to forget. And that's unfortunate, but I've kind of noticed that's true. So like I've had great releases without pre-orders, but I've also had great releases with pre-orders. And for me, like, unfortunately, when you do a pre-order, you have a deadline now and you must stick to it unless you have to cancel it, which I do often. And for some reason, Amazon still lets me come back and do more. Because I'm always like, I'm sorry. And then, okay, we'll reinstate you. I'm like, okay.
Yeah. The fake deadline, though, like, isn't the fake deadline, though, you can get out of it. So it's kind of like you need that adrenaline rush. So if you really
need the real deadline.
Yeah, the real deadline. Like, fake one, my brain knows, like, I don't really have to do it.
I know. I don't really have to write this right now because it's not a real deadline.
I also like the fire under my butt. And I think a lot of creative minds, like, we like that. Like, you can't procrastinate anymore. You have to do it. And that forces you into it.
Yeah. And it's tough always at first. So then after a while, you kind of get into it and you get warmed up. For me, like, generally speaking, I'd say the first 30,000 words of a book for me are the struggle point. So after class 30,
how many words do you write? I only write 50. So when you said the first 30, I'm like, like you're.
But I think I think that would count even if I wrote 50. I think that would still count. I think it would still take me 30 to do it. So it's more like the amount of words and not so much the amount of book. But usually
my halfway point. That's I'm only like,
I know that you write much. Yeah. Sometimes I do around 50, 55, sometimes 60, but yeah. So do you write around the 90, 110?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. I'd say, I mean, some of my books are like 80, but those are contemporaries. And then most of them are like 90 to 110. Yeah, I'd say. Yeah. But no, I definitely, I need that push. Otherwise it doesn't get going. But like, when it comes to like feeling it, it takes about 30,000 words before I'm like, okay, I'm in it. And until that point, I'm just like, I don't know who these people are. Like the other thing about me that's interesting, that I think is interesting to me, to my own self, is that when I am writing, I have to write linear. I know you'd think because of ADHD, I jump to different points of the story because it's more interesting like later on, but I cannot write ahead of myself because I have to go through what the character goes through as I'm writing. So I can't write 3 chapters and then be like, oh, I'm going to write chapter 10 because that's more fun, because like I have to go through all these chapters before 10 to know how they're going to feel at 10. even though I do plot in total and chapter by chapter, it's very rough plotting. So I don't necessarily know how they feel or how they'll act upon that. So that for me is like, some people are like writing out of order. I'm like, oh, I wish I could do that. But actually it doesn't work out very well because then I have to rewrite it like crazy once I get to that scene. The only time I can do it is an epilogue. I can sometimes write the epilogues before I write the book, which is odd, but because it's just such a, or a prologue, it's such like a capsule of a space that it doesn't necessarily have, you don't have to go through all this stuff to get there kind of thing. But yeah.
No, I have to write linear too, because that's the movie in my head. That's like you said, I have to go through this. We might arrive at the same point I wanted to anyways, but they might come in totally like scarred and bleeding than before they were like happy skipping in, like it's just, I need to know where. I can't just jump into a scene and be like, okay, how's everybody's mood? What are we talking about here?
I'm the weirdo. I can write backwards. I can like skip around. I can start at like chapter 12 and then like I'll write chapter 11 just to see the ending of chapter 10. And I haven't even written anything else. Yeah, I like,
oh wow.
I've written chapters backwards also. Like if I get stuck on dialogue, but I know how it ends, I'll write the ending and then work myself up to the dialogue.
That's interesting.
It's amazing how everyone is so different in their writing process. It's very interesting to me.
Yeah. And I could see how that could work too. Like it wouldn't work in my brain, but I can see how that what you're saying makes sense. Like I can see how that would make sense for you to do that, because like it's a way of like, I think for all of us as authors generally, I feel like for me anyways, like when an idea comes to me and the characters, they already exist in this world, and I'm just like an archaeologist that's like uncovering it. So like the whole book is there, you just gotta chip away at it until it's free. But these things, it's almost like I didn't invent them, they exist, and I'm just kind of bringing
it to life. That's a great analogy.
It's a good analogy. I always like to say that, like, I'm not the ones torturing them, they're doing this all
exactly. And people are like, how did you come up with this character? I'm like, I didn't, he just exists somehow. It's like I don't know, I'm like channeling them maybe, but it makes sense if you look at it that way, that even if you're working backwards, you're still just finding out ways to like reverse engineer it.
Yeah.
So I like that. Yeah.
Thank you. It was fun. If you ever get stuck on dialogue now, you might be in the back of your head. Maybe I can skip to the end and work myself. Yeah.
Yeah, we never know.
Yeah.
I'm gonna just start writing backwards. They're gonna be like,
I know.
So I have been seeing your Instagram posts. Please tell the audience all about your new release because they need to know about it.
Okay, so my newest release is called Legend, and it's this conclusion to a duet that started with Hollow. And basically, in a nutshell, this is a gothic romance, dark academia retelling of the legend of Sleepy Hollow. And it's part of so last year I had an idea for a series that I would redo. I would do retellings of classic gothic and horror novels, because those are kind of my jam.
I have to interrupt you to just say this is so fucking sexy.
Well, thank you.
It is.
Yeah, it is so hot.
That's like my thing. So as soon as
my thing too. I was just like, no, this is what I meant to do. And so I wasn't sure when I was going to do Hollow, but I originally had all these plans. Plans get messed up because, life. And so I was going to maybe start with Phantom of the Opera and then work my way down to Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde and then Legend of Sleepy Hollow. But none of those happened yet because, again, life. And when I got close to Halloween, I was like, well, I was going to do Hollow around Sleepy Hollow around Halloween. So I thought, okay, I'm going to do that now. So I decided in August, like, I'm going to do the Legend of Sleepy Hollow, but I want to make it, like, I want to do a twist in it, obviously, because it's a retelling, but I don't want to, like, it's a short story, right? So there's a lot you could play with, and it's not going to sound at all like the original, but I kept it still as a historical. It's not set in the 1700s, but the 1800s. And I wanted to do a dark academia because I've always wanted to write one of those. So I turned it into a school for witches in Sleepy Hollow, and that's run by this mysterious coven. And I turned it into an MMF. So this was my first polyamory book. And at the time I was just like, yeah, I think I'm ready to write this. I've written like 80 books and like, it's about time I'm like headed in this direction.
And you did a fabulous job at
it. I adored it, especially the MM. I was just like, this is opening a whole
great
world. Thank you. It's opened a whole world for me because, like, you like to be challenged as an author. And so having two people fall in love with each other is, hard enough to write, but to have 3 people fall in love with each other, I was just like, this adds another layer of just like interesting dynamics and conflict to play with. So I just fell in love with writing this book so much. Originally, it was not supposed to be a duet in true fashion to me. It turned out, I don't know what I was thinking. I was so delusional because I thought that it would be a 100,000 word book and that would be it. And the second part was 120,000 words. So I was like, how did I think I was going to put like 120,000 word book condensed into 15,000 words at the end? Like, it just didn't make any sense. And I can't believe I thought I was just going to fit it all in one book. But anyways, so I decided absolute last minute, as in 2 days before I was supposed to upload the book, I thought, I gotta stop writing right now. And then just go on to the other book, because like there's so much to fit in, I can't do it. And so anyway, so I did that. And so it ended up being Hollow and Legend. Luckily, I did them a month apart. And I don't know how I wrote that Legend in a month or less, but I did. And I was still in the world, so like I was still able to go along. And yeah, it's very spooky. It's a tad horror in it, but nothing like people are like, oh, I'm too scared for it. I'm like, I don't think I'd be too scared, but it is spooky. And it's dark and it's very angsty. It's very spicy. And yeah, so it's just basically about Ichabod Crane, Katrina Van Tassel, and Brom Bones. And it made a lot of sense to me because those are the 3 main players in the story. So obviously, if I was thinking more linear, like, just like heteronormative, I would have been like, okay, it's just Ichabod and Katrina, and that's the romance. Because if you look at Sleepy Hollow, the movie, that's kind of what that was about. But I was like, no, but what about Brom? Like, shouldn't they be kind of like a triangle? And that's kind of where that came from. So it's like, okay, this actually makes a lot of sense. And yeah, I just loved it. I think it's like one of the sexiest books I've ever written, if not the sexiest, especially Legend. Legend is the one where I think I've seen a few, there's too much sex reviews. I'm like,
so the one not to give your mom to give to the friends.
I know. And usually I'm just like, I would see reviews, I'm just like, oh, but this one I was like, well, I can't argue with that. Like, you're right.
That's a good bad review. That's like, I'll take it.
I know. I'm like, you got me.
Screenshot it, block out the name, and run that on that.
Yeah, exactly. Like, thank you. I mean, like, I wasn't trying, but that's what happened. So that's out. And even though it's not spooky season anymore,
it's always spooky season.
It's still dark outside, and it's still the kind of time where the veil is thin and the spirits are about, and you want something sexy to keep you warm at night, then that would be the duet. So that's my newest release.
I love it. It's delicious.
Do you have any events you're doing, upcoming events?
Yes. So I'm trying not to do so many anymore because it just kind of really takes me out of my headspace. But next year I'm doing a Polycon.
Oh, good. I'll see you there.
Yep. Polycon, Book Bonanza, like the big ones.
Okay, I'll see you there too.
Book Bonanza, Steamy Lit Con, and is it Rainy City, the one in Seattle in October? Yeah. So that one too. So I'm doing 4. I'm just like, did I accidentally promise something else? But no, I think it's just 4. Yeah.
I do that all the time. She's constantly going, no, you have this one too. I'm like, shit.
It's so easy to overcommit yourself because you're like, because FOMO, because you're like, I don't want to miss out, and I'm so grateful you invited me. You know what I mean? Like, and you kind of, it's hard to say no to events, I find. But this year I'm like, no, 4, and you're sticking to it and you're done. I'm like, all right, fine. So
excellent. If our readers, listeners have any questions for you, is it all right if they leave them in the comments?
Of course.
And we will poke you.
Okay. Good to know. I need all the pokes.
Thank you. Yeah. Well, we could go really into that. We'll leave that one alone. But thank you so much for joining us, and you enjoy the beautiful weather over there. And
thank you.
Shiver and cold over here.
And if you enjoyed our episode, please like, subscribe, follow, all of those things.
Yes. And tell us all about it. Thank you guys.
Thank you.
Thank you.
That was so much fun.